Hi, and welcome to the Parker J. Cole Show. I am your host, Parker J., and we are talking about the cross of the marijuana leaf. Should Christians use pot? Should they condone the use of it in our society? I was telling my guest co-host today that I was not aware that ever in my life would I ever be talking about marijuana. But I'm glad to be having this conversation. And the reason why I'm glad to have this conversation is the fact that it's such a very controversial subject. There are people who use marijuana recreationally, there are people who use it medicinally, and there are people who profit from the use of it either way. So the question becomes, how should we respond to this? One of the questions that my guest contributor is going to answer is, what would Jesus do? When we say this statement, it usually is used as a cliche. But in this case, as Christians particularly, we need to ask the question, what would Jesus do? If our goal is to be Christ-like, how would the use of marijuana affect that walk? I think it's a very valid question, but I do understand, too, that there are nuances to this whole topic. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest co-host and contributor today, Linda Nathan. Linda, how are you doing today?
Oh, hi, Parker. Thank you so much for having me on here. I just want to say my husband, Richard, who's an integral part of this whole thing, is wanted to be on, but he worked overnight and couldn't make it. I wrote and researched and wrote the booklet, but Richard does the heavy lifting, and he works in the psychiatric unit. And a lot of what he does is, unfortunately, confidential, so we can't go into that. But he is entirely supportive of everything I have to say here today, too. He's worked in the psychiatric field for over 26 years. So I just thought that was important to mention. How would you like to proceed here? I understand you have a lot of questions for me.
So here's the thing. I'm glad that you mentioned about the fact that Richard, who's your husband, has experience in this, because we're not talking from a vacuum. It's not just me giving our opinion. You're able to utilize his experience as well as your own to answer some of these questions when it comes to the cross and the marijuana leaf. And so what I want to do a brief overview of the book, which is The Cross and the Marijuana Leaf. It's available on Amazon.com. It's a very short book. You could probably read it within an hour. If you're a slow reader, maybe an hour and a half. But it's a very short book, very comprehensive, and there's a lot of information that you can look up yourself. It's heavily annotated with lots of sites and research and resources for you to also verify the information that Linda has in this book. And so what I want to do is encourage you to go to Amazon.com, get a copy of this book, and then read it for yourself, because that way you're not just listening to what we're saying. You can also follow the trail of information that Linda has and also come to your own determination about these things. Okay? So I want to let our listeners know that. And, Linda, we did get a number of comments and questions from those when I advertised the show on social media this week. So what I want to do, I want to break this interview up into two parts. I want to discuss the book first, kind of get some questions from the book, a little bit about you, and then I want to spend the rest of the time talking and responding to the comments of our supporters and listeners as they talk about this subject, because we have comments and questions from all over the spectrum, those who agree, those who don't agree, those who have no opinion whatsoever. And with this, we have something called a civil discourse. Nowadays, if you have anything that dissents from the popular opinion, people try to shut you down. But one thing I have always said is that if we don't talk about these things, then we really don't have a resolution. Because if you don't talk, how do you know that what your stance is on something is valid? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we invite you to call in. You can call in at 646-668-8485 and then press 1 to be live on air. Or you can hit me on Twitter at Parker J. Cole, hashtag PJC Show, with your questions or comments. So let's get right into it. Linda, go ahead and give us a brief summary of who you are, and we'll go from there.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Jesus Christ saved me. He healed me from cancer. He gave me a child when I wasn't able to have children. He saved a marriage that had gone down the tubes. I first met Richard, my husband, in 1962 in an anarchist group in San Francisco, and it was just before the 60s were starting to bloom. We lived through the whole thing, the whole West Coast New Age drug culture, took psychedelics, smoked pot, the whole thing. In 1976, we got saved together. Praise the Lord. Today, miraculously, we have a loving marriage. We have a wonderful family, and God has just done amazing things for us. So I am devoted to trying to speak to what God has done in our lives. That's why we wrote our novel, The Glittering Web, and the whole pot issue we see as part of the glittering web. It's been part of the deception that we were in before we became Christians. I realize that is not always going to be a popular view, but we've come through really a lot. We've seen lives destroyed, and God has opened our eyes to what's happening now. At one time, the drugs seemed like a good thing, but they came to seem like deception after a while. And then Richard has worked in the psychiatric field for over 26 years. He also has a seminary degree and has been a Bible teacher for over 30 years. So we really care most about following Christ and about living lives worthy of the calling that we have received. And I want to speak to Christians about that. I see the pot issue as secondary to following Christ and following His Word and making His Bible number one in our lives. And the Bible has things to say about walking in darkness and walking in light. So that's where I'm at. And the pot issue is something that, for years, we smoked it back in the 60s and 70s when it was probably 2% THC. But then it began to dawn on me a few years ago that, wow, things have really changed, and now the THC content is shooting through the ceiling, and that is a psychedelic element or component of the plant, and people needed to be warned, and at least I can do is kind of shake people up if they're resistant to thinking about this. So anyway, that's why I wrote the booklet, and there's a lot of information out there. It's a complex issue. It's not easy to separate all the elements of what's happening today because it's happening so fast. It's like a tsunami. They're calling the sale of marijuana now the new gold rush, and billionaires are jumping in, and people are making tons of money off it. So it's a huge issue just in terms of people wanting to make money off of it, and there's a lot of resistance to just thinking about it. But as Christians, our number one goal should be to focus on Jesus Christ and His Word and to walk according to His Word, no matter what the world says. So anyway, that's my take on it, and that's where I'm coming from. So I'll do my best today to answer questions. Hey, I don't know that I consider myself an expert at all. I just read what I can and study and pray, and have had this long background of deception. So anyway,
but that's the thing.
Take
I like
it away,
how you
Parker.
said that. Well, I like what you said.
Pardon?
It's not really about pot. I like how you said it's not really about pot, but because the issue is pot, or in my vernacular, I would say weed. But regardless of what you call it, what is called marijuana. The thing is that, how does this affect us? So that's what we want to get down to. So I have some questions that I sent to you because as I was researching and then listening to the comments and questions that we received from listeners, I realized that this is a very complex issue because there's a lot of factors involved. And I know you're not coming through as an expert or anything like that. So I don't know what there's some kind of disclaimer supposed to make. We're not experts or whatever. We're not experts. Okay, we've made that clear. So
right.
One of the things,
there are good books
that I
and
do
good
have
research out there.
Yeah,
Excuse me, go ahead.
So that's why we encourage you to do your own research as well. So one of the things I want to say, too, is that it was recently legalized here in Michigan. And in my state, when it was put to the vote, we legalized it. Now, one of the things, and I have to mention this because some of the pathways to legalizing marijuana have not necessarily been because of the drug itself. So in my state, it was of interest to me that one of my family members said that what made them vote yes to legalizing this was this. They said, I've seen black men put into jail with just a quarter bag of marijuana. And when she said that, I actually thought about what she said. I said, that is a very valid point, and they're put in jail for not for a couple of nights, but for years, okay? And she said, this speaks to disparity among ethnicities. But in your opinion, Linda, do you think it's a valid concern?
I would say you need to differentiate between the safety of promoting marijuana with the incarceration issue. They're two different issues. The first issue should be the danger of the drug itself and whether you're encouraging the dealers who are really hurting people by selling this toxin to people. You need to differentiate between legalization and decriminalization. And legalization makes the state the drug sponsor by giving it the government's approval. For instance, here in Washington State, where everything's legal, that should be illegal, it's become a pot dealer, the state is. It's making tons of money off the taxes. But so a lot of people don't talk about this difference. Now, decriminalization doesn't do that, which Richard and I both think is a preferred route to go instead of legalization. Is just decriminalization so that these people, these black men you're talking about who are put into jail, or that lady that President Trump just recently pardoned who had been in jail for years for some minor drug infraction, things like that won't happen. And that a lot of people don't talk about this, but I think it's in Europe. Richard was telling me that if you're arrested, and they have decriminalization there, but if you're arrested, you have to go to treatment, and the money that's used from the pot dealers that they take over is then used for treatment. That seems to me like a much better route than legalization. And I have a book here by a addiction psychiatrist named Ed Gogek, MD. He's been an addiction psychiatrist for over 20 years, and in fact himself, he was addicted to pot when he was in his teens. And he writes about, it's called Marijuana Debunked, the case against legalization. And he talks about how the pot lobby is the main aim is to get legalization because they just want free access to it. And he talks about it from the point of view of an addiction psychiatrist who works with people who are addicted. And pot is addicting. It wasn't so much back in our day where it was like 2%, but the THC nowadays is just enormous. Plus, they are taking it and condensing it and turning it into things like dabs and things where it's like 100% practically THC, and it can just send you into orbit. It can be so bad. So, and I know that's affecting a lot of young people. So anyway, that's my take on the issue. I think that discrimination needs to be made. And yes, I don't think that people, black or white or green or anybody, should go to jail just for a quarter bag of marijuana, but they should get some help, and there should be a differentiation there. So I hope that brings some clarity to the issue.
Well, let's go into, you made a statement about this before, because my only interaction with weed has been and when I mean interaction, it's not like I ever smoked it. I've been around people who have. And I remember the last time it happened was about 3 years ago. I went to a comedy show here in Detroit, and I got out the car, Linda. I got out my car. I'm in the parking structure. You have to understand the setting here. I'm in the parking structure, open venue, and I was hit by the smell of it as soon as I walked out my car, and it followed me. And I totally believe I had like secondary high because my head was killing me the next morning, and my head was killing me, and I had to go to church. I had to go to church the next morning because it was a Saturday. So I had to go to church the next morning. I was terrified that I would walk into church smelling like weed. I'm like, oh, my goodness. And I'm showering like, Jesus, I didn't do anything. So the first thing I did, I said, Pastor, if I smell like weed, it's not because I was smoking it. And he was like, you don't smell like weed. And then why are we even talking about this? And Pastor, I just told him what happened. I said, and I walked in, and it was horrific. For me, it was absolutely horrific, and I couldn't understand why we have a problem. But it brings to mind what you said. And you made a couple of mentions of this about how the weed back when you were smoking it was different than the weed of today. And I think we really need to understand that part of it. I know we don't have a lot of time, but see if you can truncate what the difference is. And I may have to ask you for definitions as well, just so we'll understand what's going on.
Well, I have a section in my booklet about that where it talks about the statistical difference. Turbo pot, not your grandmother's marijuana, is the section in my booklet. And
oh my gosh.
That was somebody else's term, not mine, but I thought it was really applicable. A lot of people don't realize this, that the current weed is immensely more powerful than it used to be, to the point of being hallucinogenic. There's a really excellent book that I read several years ago by William Bennett and Robert White called Going to Pot, and it's about the pot issue in America. I really recommend it highly. And they said, quote, "Let's acknowledge that today's marijuana is at least 5 times stronger than the marijuana of the past. The THC levels of today's marijuana average around 15%, but go as high as 20% and above in the dispensaries found throughout the states that have legalized it for, quote, medicinal or recreational use. The marijuana of today is simply not the same drug as it was in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. It's much more potent and leads to a great many more health risks." And then they also, another marijuana potency project at the University of Mississippi found levels of THC as high as 37%. So, and up to as close to 40%. I think it's getting a lot higher, and especially if you cook it, put it in brownies or something, or if you condense it like down into these dabs and other things, which people are doing. There's a really good video. Well, let me first of all just say I have a Facebook page people can go to, and there's tons of articles on it. I keep it updated all the time, called The Cross and the Marijuana Leaf. You can also find it under Christians and Pot. And all these articles are on it, and I keep it updated, and we talk about all these kinds of issues. So I forget what I was going to say now, but anyway, I recommend going to the page and finding all these articles, and you can look up all the statistics and stuff for yourself. Oh, I know what I was going to say. There's a movie that a young man in high school made, a kind of a home movie, and it's on my page, and he just basically shows all the high schoolers turning on all the time, and these kids going into seizures from the huge amounts of THC in the pot, and thinking this is cool and this is what you do, and young people talking about, hey, I used to be a A and a B student, but I don't care about that stuff anymore. And I mean, it's pretty illuminating of what's happening now. So you need to be aware that. And they're mixing it with stuff. I mean, it's really hard to know what you're going to get.
So my question is this. And then we're going to go to take a quick break. My question is this. So you use the term THC and how that has increased over time. Now, mind you, I have never smoked weed. Not that I'm, goody two-shoes. I never have, because I'm not interested. And when I did, I tell you what happened.
Consider it a blessing.
I had a headache.
Consider it a great blessing in your life.
But
that you've been spared that. There's plenty of other things you can have trouble with without that.
If I could just stop, I won't go there. I'm not saying I don't have my addiction. Don't misunderstand me. But it's just not weed. But at the same time, so you use the term THC. I have no idea what that means. I hear it a lot, and even our questions and comments that we're going to go through, a number of people mentioned the THC, and they also mentioned CBD. So what are these elements? I mean, educate us on what THC is and what CBD is.
Oh, okay. I'm looking that up here in my booklet. You need to understand there's like something around 400 components in the marijuana plant. And CBD is short for cannabinol. I can't pronounce that too well. Or CBD, they call it. And THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. Tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC,
we'll take your word for it.
Call it. THC, right, okay.
Right.
So those two components have become absolutely central in the battle that's going on nowadays, and in the whole issues that are going on. And what's happening is the THC has the psychedelic stuff in it, and that can really make you high. I think there's got to be a better word than high. I would call it maybe flipping out. But anyway, that's what the THC does. The CBD is, people are claiming that it has all these healing properties, and it doesn't have THC in it. And interestingly, one thing I read, the CBD in the plant is supposed to counteract the psychedelic qualities of the THC. So sometimes what happens in these products that are being sold, they mix a little bit of THC in with it because the people claim, well, you need it for better therapeutic effects or something or so forth. Anyway, you need to understand none of this stuff is really regulated at this point. So, and it's being sold all over the country, especially the CBD oil, which I believe, and Richard believes, and this addiction psychiatrist believes, is the tip of the spear in the battle. They're using CBD oil, claiming it's really medical, and you hear anecdotal stories. I've heard many of them about how it has healing effects. But they're using it as the tip of the spear to bring in legalization of the THC, the marijuana itself. And they're two different issues, and there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of information, and we can go into that more later too. I've got information on that here in my. The FDA, for instance, has approved only one CBD product, which is a prescription drug to treat 2 rare severe forms of epilepsy. And that's all that they've found that in using scientific studies. Now, that's the problem, is there's very few really solid scientific studies about the benefits of CBD oil. I've heard plenty of, just people saying, oh, yeah, my Aunt Bertha used it and it healed her arthritis and things like that. But they're not scientific studies. And so anyway, so the FDA has only just approved that one drug. Now, so on the other hand, there's a lot of evidence mounting and historical evidence that prolonged cannabis use can really lead to psychotic disorders for previously healthy adults, and as well, especially for people who have schizophrenic tendencies already. It can just put them over the edge. There's a lot of good information out there. I can't go into it all right now. There's a book that people ought to read that is so good called Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence by Alex Berenson. He was a New York Times award-winning writer whose wife is a forensic psychiatrist, works in a big prison and mental ward. And she clued him in and said, look, the marijuana is causing a lot of these criminals to do what they're doing, and violence. There's a real strong connection with violence with marijuana. And he said he poo-pooed her, but she says, well, you ought to go investigate for yourself. So he did, and he was shocked at what he found. And in fact, he has a very good chapter in his book going back through the history of marijuana use in other countries, and especially in India, where it was very documented by MDs, the connection between marijuana and violence. And that's another whole issue. But anyway, I don't want to just go off into all sorts of other directions. You must have other questions you want to ask, too.
Well, let me do this. We're going to go ahead and take a really quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to start going through the comments and questions that we did receive from our supporters and listeners here at the Parker J. Cole Show. You're more than welcome to call in and ask a question or comment on our discussion by calling in at 646-668-8485 and then press that 1 to be live on air, or hit me on Twitter, Parker J. Cole, hashtag PJC Show, with your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Are you an indie author looking to create audiobooks listeners will love? At The Audio Flow, we handle the entire process, from casting the perfect voice to distribution. Contact us today at 317-927-8770. The Audio Flow, a new way to do audio.
As an author, you understand the devastation of someone plagiarizing your work, but what if someone stole your identity? Protect yourself and your family with identity theft protection. Services include credit monitoring, credit reports and scores from all 3 credit bureaus, social security number, emails, credit cards, bank account monitoring, and social media monitoring from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. For more information, call 248-525-7680.
Question: if you write a book, everybody will rush out to buy it. Obvious answer: no. If you were a celebrity or if you had a huge marketing budget, then maybe you can get a lot of exposure for your book. Another solution would be to check out joeytweets.com. joeytweets.com is a promotion and marketing service with access to over 1/3 of a million followers on Twitter. joeytweets.com has 3 packages available to fit any budget. That's joeytweets.com. joeytweets.com. Get some serious exposure for your books.
Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to the Parker J. Cole Show on WPJC 104.5. We are talking about The Cross and the Marijuana Leaf, which is also a booklet that you can pick up today on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Helping me discuss this is my guest co-host and contributor today, Linda Nathan. She, along with her husband, have had a lot of experience dealing with marijuana, not just personal use, but in doing research and resources. Her husband, Richard, who is unable to be with us today, works in an industry where he can see the effects of marijuana on some patients. He is unable to tell us that information due to confidentiality, but with this, we are talking from, as much as we possibly can, an informed point of view. Not me, but Linda. But we also want to make sure we're not medical professionals, experts, whatever the disclaimer is about, health or whatever. We're not it. But we definitely want to have a conversation because it is a very controversial topic when you talk about marijuana. There's a lot of information out there, but is that information accurate? And then we have to talk about the spiritual element. Should Christians use pot? Should they condone the use of it in our society? And then most importantly, what would Jesus do? And we're not making a cliche statement. We're really asking the question, what would Jesus do? And so with that, we're trying to do our best to tackle this very broad topic. And so, Linda, what I want to do now is start to go through our questions and comments that we received from our listeners and supporters. A lot of people do have a lot of opinions on it all over the spectrum. And so what I want to do is ask a couple of questions first. The first question comes from RD. The first question comes from RD, and RD says, what are your thoughts about using a derivative of marijuana for pain reduction similar to opioids? RD, thank you so much for your question. Linda?
Using a derivative of marijuana. Okay, he doesn't say what that is, or she, whoever this person is. First of all, I just want to say something here, Parker, based on what you were just saying. I appreciate clarifying I'm not a medical professional. I'm a Christian who loves the Lord and His Word, but I'm also a researcher and a writer, and I've had my own writing and editing business for almost 30 years. And this is my passion, is to research topics and serve the Lord that way. So that's what I'm trying to do here today, if I can just throw some light on some of these things. The question was, use a derivative of marijuana. Okay, that, first of all, is not clear to me what that means. Does that mean CBD? Does that mean something else in the plant? Does it mean marijuana itself? And then he said something about opioid. You read that last part to me again about.
So I'll read the whole question. It says, what are your thoughts about using a derivative of marijuana for pain reduction similar to opioids?
Pain reduction similar to opioids. I don't know. It's too general a question. First of all, opioids are horribly addictive, as everybody knows. Even though they have a healing quality to them, they have to be done under prescription. So I would suggest that he find a doctor, he or she, find a doctor or a medical professional who has some knowledge of the topic and go and talk about that. And I realize that's maybe a hard thing to find these days, but that this person not get addicted from whatever they're doing. That's a really important thing.
So that's RD.
That's my best
Palmer.
answer.
He's a gentleman. He's a young man. He's a young man who supports the show, and I get his thoughts because one of the arguments for marijuana is that, hey, it can reduce pain reduction. And you talk about the opioids, and opioids are extremely addictive. And, yeah, you have no pain for 12 hours, but you're also stoned, too. And they were talking about other effects of it. So I get what he's saying, but maybe you need a little more clarity and everything like that. So let's go to our next one here. Our next one comes from Mary. Mary from Cincinnati. Mary says, did God give plants to heal and to help? Mary, thank you so much for your question. Linda?
Yeah, that's the argument that marijuana is a plant, one of the plants of the field, and therefore we have a right to use it. Well, I want to say the Venus flytrap is also a plant of the field, but we don't take that. Belladonna is another plant of the field, but or it comes from one, but we don't take that. There are poisonous plants. Marijuana has a long history over centuries of creating physical and mental problems, as well as being used in witchcraft, in creating a trance state that can open you up to spirits, demonic spirits. I say this from personal experience, and I don't agree with the herbal argument at all. I have a thing on that in my booklet too. And Paul, the apostle, says that we may be able to do all things, but not all things are good for us. So this is a fallen creation, and I would be very careful not to just assume every plant is just fine. That's my best answer. Parker, are you there?
We got a comment from Paul in San Jose, California. And Paul says, back in the 70s and 80s, I smoked a lot of pot. I joked that I probably smoked my way out of a 3-bedroom house. When I was 36, I didn't want to smoke it anymore and quit. For a week or so, it was painful, but after that, I was fine. He says people should be able to do what they want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And if someone wants to waste time and money like that, it's up to them. I'm certainly not going to tell people they can't use CBD oil or something else like that if they're in pain. It should be their choice and no one else's, including the government. So when you hear a comment like that, Linda, what do you think? And Paul, thank you so much for joining in the conversation.
Well, Paul, I guess my first response is just, I'm a Christian and I'm seeking to follow the Lord. So that would be my first concern. And so I don't know in your case, did it help you in your walk with the Lord? And yes, up to a certain point, people should be allowed to do what they want. But then also the mental wards are full of people doing what they wanted too. So you need to be careful about doing what you want. And, of course, back in the 70s and 80s, the pot was of a different strength than it is nowadays. Also, I really believe that you shouldn't just people can go and try. I mean, I'm great for natural medicines. I found that we've studied herbs and all that kind of thing over the years. My husband took a course in it, has a degree in biology, and so we're really into alternative methods of health, and I certainly would love to be able to try CBD oil. I'm just still very suspicious of it because of the tremendous turmoil around it and the lack of knowledge and the lack of scientific evidence and just anecdotal stories, which I've heard quite a few from drug dealers, by the way, and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, it's your life. Hey, God gave you a life, and if you want to spend it that way, that's up to you. But if it starts to impact other people, and if it, I don't know, if it makes you a person that can't function, I would say there's something really wrong with it, and that you ought to really be thinking about it seriously and praying about it. So that's my best answer, I think.
Marissa from Saginaw, Michigan says, just spent 10 days with a gal who had to go without her medical marijuana. By the 4th day, she was happy and outgoing like she'd been most of her life. When using the marijuana, she was withdrawn and quiet. She found other ways to cope without the marijuana the whole time she was with me. Yes, there are the extreme cases that need it, the sigh. I think that too many people are relying on it and missing life's joys that are out there. Marissa, thank you so much for your comment. Linda?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with that. I think the only real joy is in the Lord, and walking in holiness as much as you can in this fallen world and our fallen lives. But yeah, I think marijuana really can, especially the strong strains that there are today, can really induce really heavy things in people and cause them to flip out. I know of a number of cases personally where those things have happened. But, again, you're asking me, what would I do? I would stay away from it completely. I've had the Lord healed me of cancer over 40 years ago, but I've had a lot of other health problems since, and I've always managed to find a solution for pain, and there are many other good solutions besides going back to marijuana or trying CBD oil. I would like to try CBD oil if it didn't have THC in it, but I still am very not trusting of the industry. It's very unregulated. You go to the health food store and you'll see 15 different varieties of CBD oil all in one case, and they're all coming from different manufacturers. And it's very murky situation these days. So I hope that helps.
Chris from Grand Rapids, Michigan says, as a pastor, I wonder, when does a person become a slave to something? I'm not a legalistic pastor, meaning I won't automatically call smoking weed sin, but where does a person's satisfaction come from? Too often, people I minister to who smoke marijuana are defensive and angry when you ask a simple question, are you a slave to it? Their anger often proves it, and they will accuse you of being a self-righteous legalist. No, all I'm asking is, when does a weed become your God? That's a comment from Chris in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Chris, thank you so much for joining in the conversation. Linda, how would you respond to that or underpin that with some of your own thoughts?
Well, I think that's a great question to ask ourselves about anything, not just marijuana, but just anything in our lives. God says He hates idolatry. And, in Romans 1, it talks about idolatry leads into a darkened mind and into all sorts of terrible sinfulness. And I think that big part of the problem that I see with marijuana is it leads to a darkened mind. And it can lead. I'm not saying smoking one joint is going to necessarily do that to you, but I believe that overall that's what it does. So I think it's good that this pastor is asking this, because I think biblically that's the real question. Is something else replacing the Lord in our lives? Are we getting our pleasure from something other than loving Jesus and walking with Him in the light? I hope that helps.
Paulette from Facebook says, I had a doctor that wanted me to take it to relieve pain. I told him, no, thank you. I will find ways to do it naturally or live with it, which she has. He said, why? There's nothing wrong with it. I said, it kills your brain cells, for one. No, thank you. I don't believe anyone except those, and I believe she meant to say who are terminally ill. So, Paulette, thank you so much for joining in the conversation. Linda, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I was wondering if her doctor wanted her to smoke marijuana or take CBD oil. I have read, I'm not an expert on the physical things like whether it destroys your brain cells. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, from some of the effects I've seen on people. I'm glad she didn't try it, because things I think are still so iffy at this point. The scientific evidence and the lack of it, and the struggles with CBD oil. I don't trust the industry. I don't trust the way it's being just marketed like mad. It's a huge moneymaker. Billionaires are supporting this legalization movement. George Soros it's due to his money that both Washington State and Colorado got legalized marijuana, and these people are pouring money in because they know there's huge amounts of money to be made. So I would just say to her, be cautious. I think it's really good to be cautious and prayerful. And yes, there are other pain relievers.
And this gentleman, this is Jeremy from Lake Charles, Louisiana. This is really a tongue-in-cheek comment. And he says, remember, one of the very first acts God did after the creation was to make a plant illegal. Jeremy, thank you so much for that tongue-in-cheek comment. And I thought that was pretty clever, actually. So we did get another comment from Jason in Madison Heights, Michigan. It took you a minute, didn't it? It took you a minute to kind of go like, oh, I got it. You know. So Jason from Madison Heights, Michigan says, in my opinion, it's about balance, like virtually everything else, everything in life. Too much food, too much water, too much alcohol, too much marijuana, too much work, too much exercise. Any of these things can be unhealthy. Jesus turned water into wine, so he was down with catching a buzz. And then he says balance. Jason, thank you again for your comment. And then I want to read another comment we received from Sarah in Phoenix, Arizona. And I would like to have you respond to this one. Sarah says, wax pens are causing major problems. The THC is 70 to 80% stronger than pot used decades ago and is leaving people with devastating psychological issues. On top of that, taking THC out of the product is very costly, so providers might say it's been removed when it hasn't. No Christian should touch the stuff for recreational use. It's a huge gamble, not worth taking. Sarah, thank you so much for your comment. And I know you spoke to this a little bit, Linda, but if you want to add something to her comment, please do.
Well, I agree with her about what she's saying. That my advice is avoid it completely. There's no reason for Christians to smoke it. There are other pain relievers if that's really your motive. If you're just wanting to get high or find some kind of spiritual reality, and I've heard people talk about it like this, what the reality you're going to get is going to open you up into a demonic realm and just supernatural forces that are, and hey, I may sound like a nut saying this, but I've survived really a lot, and the Lord has opened my eyes to it. So that's I would say that's my bigger concern for Christians is the spiritual deception that you can come under, not to mention the physical addiction as well. So and plus the harmfulness of it. I mean, I recommend you read some of these books that I'm recommending here. Marijuana Debunked, a handbook for parents, pundits, and politicians who want to know the case against legalization. This is by the addiction psychiatrist Ed Gogek, who himself was addicted to it when he was a teenager. So there's really good information. I'm also hoping to work on I'm trying to work on a second booklet about the church, the drug Christians and the drug culture. So in the church, because we were seeing that happening too, and there's a lot of ignorance, and people that I would have been astonished at, that I would normally be astonished at, are saying, "Oh yeah, my son opened pot shops, and oh yeah, nothing wrong with it or anything," and things like that. And anyway, that's another topic, but it's one that really concerns me too.
We got a comment. We just got a couple more comments, actually. We got a comment from Anton. Anton says, where the book of Revelation speaks about witchcraft in the latter days, take note latter, not last, it is actually referring to pharmaceuticals. Many will succumb to the influence of drugs. This does not disqualify anybody from the love of Christ or indeed from being included in the death and resurrection of Christ, but it is sad. And Anton, thank you so much for adding your comment to that. We did get another comment here.
Let me just say to that, Parker,
go ahead.
I totally agree. The word sorcery in the Bible comes from the words connected to pharmacy and drugs, and that sorcery and drugs are intimately connected in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. This comment here, I've actually never heard someone put it in this light, which is why I'm reading it. And this is from Eric. Eric, thank you for joining in the conversation. Eric says, the Bible says God created the bush, and it was good. Apostle Paul said in Timothy that for every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be refused if it is received in thanksgiving, for it is sanctified by the word of God and prayer. So weed is good. But what makes marijuana a sin is the law of man. Man for years has put marijuana in a cage by passing laws that prohibit the smoking of marijuana. And the Bible says we should keep the laws of our nations or kings if we want to be a good and complete Christian. So anyone living in a country that marijuana is banned and he or she is smoking is breaking the law of that country and hence disobeying God's word. Until the principalities and powers and high places of a nation set free the spirit of marijuana, the people under that nation who smoke marijuana are in sin. Then he goes on to say people of Colorado, Amsterdam, and many other countries or states that have set free, and he says legalized, the spirit of marijuana are no longer condemned by God or man, and so no sin speaks against them when they smoke. Don't be deceived by man, but work out your salvation with fear and trembling with reference with the word of God. Eric, thank you so much for that comment. It's a little muddied for me. But at the
let me just say quickly to that, I would say that was spacious reasoning and not accurate. And I would say what really matters is following the law of God and not the law of man, which goes up and down and which often brings in things, witness transgender bathrooms and everything else. The law of man brings things in that are not good. And so I really don't agree with what he's saying. I hope that's been clear. I think God in the Bible makes it clear that we are to be holy before him, and he makes us holy. I'm not claiming to be some perfect holy person, by the way. I'm full of sin, but we are to be holy and walk holy as much as we can to walk in the light. And whatever the laws of the government are, I mean, there's a scene in Acts where Peter says, do we obey the laws of God or the laws of man? So we need to be clear what the laws of God are. And the Bible is pretty clear about keeping a clear mind so that we can pray, it says. You know, it's because of the warfare, because Satan prowls around seeking who he may devour. Let me just really quickly respond to that, too. With 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, God sends a powerful delusion so they will believe the lie because they refused to love the truth and be saved. That scripture has been so important to me, and I think that if we pay attention to that, it could save us a lot of trouble. I can't think of a worse place to be in than under a powerful delusion that God has given me because I don't love the truth. So let me just end with that for that question.
No, it's a valid point, and actually I get where he's going with his logic.
I do too, but I don't agree with his
conclusion. I can't agree with his conclusion because if that's the case, there's a lot of things. I mean, we can take that. I won't go there. So what I'm going to do, because we are running out of time, I'm going to truncate some of our responses here just so our listeners know that we have at least addressed and commented and their thoughts have been heard on the show. So Sherry from Facebook says, I believe the all-or-nothing attitude proponents of marijuana are bringing is much of the problem. What I'm saying is the proponents want full legal status without any kind of regulation. Our other addictive medicinal drugs are regulated, so why not this one? There's so much misinformation out there about it, both pro and con. Sherry, I had to truncate your comments, but thank you so much for joining in the conversation. Erica from Rochester Hills, Michigan says, as a believer in Christ and the Word of God, the Holy Bible, the goal is to follow Christ. We can't do what we want as Christians. That's unrealistic and opposite of what our faith teaches. I don't have to give my own opinion on the topic when my desire and efforts are to do according to what Christ will have me do. How does faith in Christ look when a Christian blends in with everyone else? Erica, thank you so much for that. Again, I had to truncate your comment there. Nat from Yakima, Washington says, she says, my husband uses it in various forms. It helps with mood stabilization, sleep, and pain. He doesn't need it all the time, but I can say that we have had many days where we had better time as a family using that stuff because he wasn't irritable from being in pain or lack of sleep. And she goes on, and then she says, final point, my husband almost died from taking medication for his pain, nearly bled out from the ulcers it gave him. I'd much rather he use safer alternatives. Nat, thank you so much for your comment. Unfortunately, I couldn't read the whole comment, but I did want to let you know that your comment has been acknowledged on the show. And then Sam from Lexington, Kentucky says, I think it's like any other drug. It can be used in a good way or a bad way. Anything can be abused. What I don't like is just allowing anyone to use it without a doctor's supervision. Then again, I would outlaw most alcohol and tobacco products, too, under the same guise. You only use it under a doctor's supervision. Eventually, only those that really needed it will have it, and to me, that would be a good thing. Though I doubt it will ever happen, it would make too much sense. Sam, again, I had to truncate your comment. Go ahead.
That's a book, Going to Pot by William Bennett. They recommend a strict prescription basis for marijuana.
Yeah, and it would make sense because the people who would need it then, and it would be a case-by-case basis. But, like, I have to agree with Sam in this regard. If we did that, it would make too much sense. So I do agree with her there. Right. I remember one lady at my old job when I worked there, her husband was dying. He's from really horrible cancer, and so she had pot, and it was really just to alleviate his pain. And he ended up passing away like 3 or 4 weeks later. He passed away, and so in that case, I have to be honest. I'm like, if it's helping him while he's on his deathbed, you know what I'm saying, Linda? It's like, okay,
I know, and that's a hard issue that I wouldn't do it myself, but because I've been through too much on the whole thing of drugs and deception and all. But I would trust the Lord with the end of my life. I do trust the Lord. I'm getting near the end of my life, and I trust Him with it. He's never failed me. So it is a personal decision. I'm not going to judge harshly somebody who decides to do that. I can understand that.
Exactly.
I did go through did a tour of a pain clinic one time, and I realized the terrible struggle it is for people with pain. And I saw all the various. I would suggest you look into pain clinics because there's a lot going on these days. You just got to watch out for the visualization part of it, where they have you visualize on a white light thing, which is occultic. But there's some very good treatments and stuff for pain and pain clinics. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that.
Okay, Colin says marijuana causes brain damage. Smoking it damages the lungs as much or more than tobacco. Marijuana is linked with several serious mental illnesses, including depression and psychosis. Marijuana, when consumed by adolescents, can permanently impair brain development. And then he goes on to say, marijuana is being oversold and overrated because we live in a permissive culture that is blind to the moral pitfalls of addiction and inebriation. For people with serious health conditions, it may have certain measurable health benefits. I am not a doctor or expert on pain relief. If you're seriously ill, very likely all the drugs you're taking have side effects. But from the evidence I have seen, it should be avoided if at all possible. Colin, thank you so much. Again, I had to truncate your comment there. And then Christy, and this is our last comment, I believe, for the – I have two more really fast. So Carol from New York says, the poppy was used for opium, but it is also used in regular medicine, such as morphine and opiates. Most of our medicines are plant-based. I think all plants can heal or cause trouble. Sugarcane, for instance, and diabetes. True doctors should be the ones that manage certain powerful plants, though. The Bible says every creature of God is good when discussing food, but God doesn't call pork or seafood. They are good, but they can create cholesterol problems. In the same way, only specialists who understand pharmaceuticals should use certain drugs. God knew the effect of cannabis on people when He made it, so we should learn to understand its use as oil, etc. Carol, thank you. Comment, and I'm so sorry for those of you who weighed in. I have to truncate them only for time's sake. Christy from Inglewood, Tennessee says just a few thoughts. As Christians, we are called to be law abiders. Therefore, no Christian should use any form of marijuana in a way that is against the law. Despite the popularity of the CBD market, every product offered is completely unregulated. God calls us to treat our bodies as temples. Therefore, using any chemical to excess or in a way that is harmful to our bodies should be avoided at all costs. God calls us to have no other gods before Him. That is the primary danger of any addiction. I think a lot of people are very excited by the idea of legalizing marijuana because it seems to be giving us more freedom and more recreational and therapeutic choices. But every choice
the devil
has a price.
Loves to give us all the freedom we want. When I was in the 60s, I just really felt like I'd found freedom. I've tried everything that promised freedom, and the only real freedom is in Jesus Christ and His Word. So I want to just say that I'm really glad to hear a lot of people's thoughts on this, and that Christians are thinking about these issues because it's invading our churches and our families, and it's a complex issue, and it involves the CBD and the THC, and they each have their own issues and chemistry. But be aware that the CBD movement is a battering ram to open the door for the full embrace of the marijuana. And just I think that's a really important issue to leave your readers with, or your listeners with.
Well, that's the point I was going to actually make. Christy, once again, I had to truncate your comment, but thank you so much for adding to our conversation. And that was the one thing I was going to have you leave us off with, was the fact that you weren't just talking about using pot. It's what it takes you from. It does affect your spiritual walk. And so some people, of course, we understand there are nuances. Sin makes everything complicated. It really does. You know, it grays out areas. God is very, be holy for I am holy. And that's very black and white. And then sin comes in, but God says, you know what, mercy for you. You see what I'm saying? So God understands these nuances and complexities of our life that sin has created. So I think this is a very good discussion, Linda. I think we answered as many questions as we possibly can. We touched on some things. Just as a constraint of time, we could not go into everything. And I want you to have your final thoughts about the topic. But before I do that, where can we find you online? And then if you can once again list those resources you mentioned throughout the broadcast so people can do their own research.
I'll be glad to do that. You can follow the issue. We call it Follow the Battle on Facebook at The Cross and the Marijuana Leaf, also Christians and Pot. And you can sign up for our free quarterly e-zine and other goodies and stuff at our book's website, theglitteringweb.com. And I consider the drug issue part of the glittering web of deception that God has allowing us all to struggle with at this time. So I would encourage people to do that. There's a pop-up. You can sign up and get the e-zine, and I send that out quarterly, and it's got all sorts of information about the New Age movement, about this issue. Our next projects, I'm working on a second booklet about the Christian drug culture, and we're working on our second book after the Glittering Web, which we're hoping will be out this year. We're also creating an audio version of the Glittering Web, and we're hoping to start our own podcast series before too long about the roots and fruits of the New Age. Now, let me just say quickly, the books I highly recommend are Marijuana Debunked by Ed Gogek, M.D. That's Gogek. And then the other one is called Tell Your Children the Truth about Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. Alex Berenson, Berenson. Those are both fairly recent books. There's another one called Weed Incorporated by a former pothead who really exposes what's going on in the pot industry, which is very interesting. I'm working my way through that one. There's some great websites. There's AALM.info. That's the Americans Against Legalizing Marijuana, and they have tons of information on there and send out regular emails and so forth and have regular conference calls. And then there's WAALM, that's Washington State.org. And then there's momstrong.org, and there's some real personal stories in there about families. There's actually been deaths from marijuana. You might want to see that. And then there's POPPOT.org, popot.org. Again, it's another family-oriented. And I just want to say one other thing, that we are available for, you can write to us if you want. I get it's authors at theglitteringweb.com, and we're really interested, especially in helping churches and youth groups understand the issues. And we've spoken a lot over the years at churches and seminary and different places. So anyway, that about says it for me right now. I hope you'll think about these issues and really be prayerful, because it's a huge battle and it's really invading the churches, and there seems to be a real lot of ignorance about it all. And I don't want a huge rush to judgment, but I do think as Christians we are to judge, because God says his judgment begins with the household of God. So on that note, I'll hand it back over to Parker. And thank you, Parker, for this opportunity. I'm very grateful for it. God bless you in your work.
Oh, thank you so much, Linda. I have to piggyback on what you said, though, as we get ready to end our show. You said there's a lot of ignorance. So you can't help but think of the Bible verse that says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge. And we know contextually he's talking about the children of Israel. But we can also take that and put it into our own state. People perish for the lack of knowledge. And that's why instead of trying to suppress people talking, you talk so you know. And if you talk about it and you're dutifully informed, then you can make an informed decision. How many people just say, oh, I can do this, and next thing you know, someone got 3 toes come out their forehead, because no one knew the right information. And that's why this is so important.
We need to love the truth, like the Bible says. And if we don't love the truth, God will eventually to cast us out into a powerful delusion, and I've seen that happen, and I'm terrified of that happening to anybody else. So that's one reason I do this. And anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you so much for coming on board. We'd love to have you back. And, at the end of the day, Linda's going to tell you, as you read The Glittering Web, this is just a subset of what the bigger picture is that marijuana and other hallucinogenic drugs and hallucinogenic pharmaceuticals open a gateway to spiritual warfare and spiritual demise, if I can use that term contextually. And that's what the overarching thing is. So what we're going to do, Linda, it just came to me. What we'll do, we'll have you back at some later date, and we'll talk about this gateway that drugs can lead you to. I remember reading a book called Death of a Guru, and where he talks about that, how LSD was opening up these portals, and people were like, whoa. And so drugs is just a symptom of something quite bigger. That's why they call it the glittering web. And so we're talking about that at a later date. So, Linda, thank you again. Tell Richard I said hi. I hope he's resting well. To all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining in the conversation. So good to have your input. And whether or not we agree or disagree, let us know that you are loved by God, that he loves you, that he cares about you, that he truly wants to be an integral part of your life. Not just an integral part, all of your life. He said, cast all your cares upon me because I care about you. We just talked about that very recently. If you're in pain, ask the Lord to heal you. If you're having financial constraints, ask the Lord to provide for you. He said, cast everything. If you're having problems with addiction, cast everything. Cast means to throw away. Throw it at them. I remember thinking, like, you get mad at somebody, and then you want to get mad at somebody, what do you want to do? Throw something at them, right? in a sense, give your problems to him. He said, I care for you. That right there, he said, cast all your cares on me because I care for you. So he's big enough to handle it. So guess what? This is just another thing you can cast unto the Lord and ask him to prayerfully guide you in your decisions. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of the Parker J. Cole Show. You have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day. God bless.